For a business like Credit Karma, we're coming into that spring and the deal is signed and COVID hits.
In order to sell your company, you had to spin off another portion of it, work with the DOJ, put up with a global pandemic, and you had to find a way to keep everybody employed while also keeping costs somewhat in check.
Yes.
That's an easy Tuesday.
It was a fun one. I wouldn't recommend that again, but it was a fun one. From there, I went to Instacart. That's a business that had just 4X'd, built really good infrastructure, but not the infrastructure for a company of that size, and was looking to imminently go public.
You have one of the most impressive resumes of any of the guests I've had on the show. When I think about product-led growth, Notion is like, they're on the Mount Rushmore.
I also think there's something valuable about acknowledging that everything isn't perfect the first time you do these things, and it takes time. It takes time to get good at forecasting. It doesn't happen overnight. There's usually 3 reasons that the actuals differ from the forecast. Fat finger error, there was an error in the model. The second reason is because you had an assumption that was incorrect. And then the last one is
this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast. Today's guest is Rama Katkar, CFO of Notion and one of the sharpest minds at the intersection of product-led growth, strategic finance, and operational storytelling. In this episode, Rama walks us through the evolution of Notion's go-to-market, from a self-serve rocket ship to a hybrid motion where PLG and enterprise sales are learning to now live in harmony. She shares how Notion balances the weekly tempo of self-serve with the quarterly drumbeat of sales, and how forecasting looks different when your product growth can be sparked by something as unpredictable as a viral avatar campaign. We also dig into her practical 3-part framework for financial modeling and how knowing which one you're dealing with is just half the battle. Then we zoom in on pricing in the age of AI. Rama shares how Notion approached monetizing its AI features, the trade-offs between virality and cost, and what she'd advise any company trying to bolt AI onto an existing product without derailing their business model. And finally, we talk M&A. Rama shares why the single most important slide in any M&A deck is the org chart, and reflects on her time helping lead Credit Karma through its acquisition by Intuit. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. This is a paid ad by Fidelity Private Shares. A messy or missing cap table might not just slow you down, it could cost you your next fundraising round. VCs get flooded with pitches, and if your equity is confusing or missing, they'll move on fast. Fidelity Private Shares is an all-in-one equity management platform that helps you maintain a clean cap table, an organized data room, and a clear equity story. Schedule a demo at fidelityprivateshares.com, mention Mostly Metrics, and get 20% off. This episode of Run the Numbers is brought to you by Mercury, business banking for founders and finance pros who want their financial stack to actually work together. Now, I don't plug tools I don't know or intimately use. I've been a Mercury customer for a couple of years now. In fact, I showed the Mercury dashboard to their CFO, Daniel Kang, from their finance team right before we hit record on this episode. It felt like a full circle moment. And what I love most is that Mercury isn't just banking, it's operational confidence. I can send a wire to a podcast editor, I can check capital balances, and I can approve a payment for a freelancer who helped me with a tech stack report, all without bouncing across tabs or praying a PDF exported correctly. Mercury's making a bet on builders. Whether you're issuing your first invoice or wiring 7 figures for a warehouse build-out, it's banking that scales with your ambition. Visit Mercury.com to apply online in minutes and see why over 200,000, entrepreneurs choose Mercury to run their business finances smarter. Here comes my banking voice. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group, Column NA, Evolve Bank and Trust, members FDIC. The IO card is issued by Patriot Bank, members FDIC, pursuant to a license from MasterCard. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI-powered this and automated that. But here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials, making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit rightrev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's rightrev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. Rama, it's nice to see you.
Great to see you too.
So we actually got the chance to meet out in SF at a dinner that I held for some CFOs, and it was so cool to hang. My wife, she helps me with like the guest list and everything like that. I'm more of like a big ideas guy. I'm not like a details person. She's like, the CFO of Notion said she was gonna come to the dinner. I was like, are you sure? Like that's a big deal. And she's like, yeah, it's like Notion.so. I'm like, it must be like some other startup with like Notion in the name. And I know it's changed to Notion.ai since then, but like I was so humbled that you came to our dinner. So thanks for doing that.
No, thanks for inviting me. It was so fun. It was such a great group of folks. And I loved the icebreaker of what was your favorite song in high school. I think that really set a good tone for the rest of the dinner. But yeah, no, love those events and meeting peers across the industry.
It's fun to meet other CFOs and finance people in person, just because I feel like we're probably one of the harder groups to like get out from behind the table in there. And people are like, what do you talk about the whole time? Is it just like a bunch of people talking about metrics? And like, that actually doesn't come up that often when you're out with finance people.
No, for sure. I feel like it's much more about, I don't know. I think most of the conversation at my table was about cross-functional relationship building and challenges as you try to scale these high growth companies. And so, no, not deep in the weeds on financials at all.
No, not at all. On this podcast, we go a bit deep in the weeds, and I'm excited because there's just so much going on at Notion. I've been a user for years. I was telling you that me and my wife actually, like, I use it for work and I use it for the podcast planning, like the schedule. Like your name is in Notion for coming on the pod today, but we also use it for like vacation and stuff. So I'm in Nantucket right now. So like we use it with the calendar and whatnot. And so I want to start off though, like back in the earlier days, and you've been there for a few years now, but like, can you maybe talk me through how Notion's like pricing and packaging has evolved over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So Notion, it's a pretty interesting business in that it's a very global business. And the majority of the business historically has come from our product-led growth motion. So it's been teams who come to the website and purchased Notion online. And it's been a very traditional kind of product-led growth land and expand motion where a team, probably in engineering, product, and design, adopts Notion, and then it expands within their team and then expands to adjacent teams. So it's currently priced on a per seat basis, which makes sense given that sort of per seat land and expand.
Yeah.
But we've had a few evolutions in my time here. I've been here for about 3 years now. When I first joined, we made a strategic decision to sort of deprecate a personal plan and really focus on monetizing the teams and the organizations that use Notion. The personal plan was actually very small anyway. And we felt like we wanted to offer a really robust free offering for individuals who are using Notion, because we have tens of millions of individuals who use Notion around the world, and they're using it for free. And this is a mix of students, solopreneurs, folks like yourself who are planning their vacations. I do the same. I plan my grocery shopping as well and my meal planning. And so it's free for all of those individuals. And one of the drivers of that is that when looking at the data, we found that nearly 50% of our paid plans actually originate from a free user. So that really gave us more confidence, and we really want there to be this robust free offering for individuals to use. But when individuals start to collaborate with other folks and bring other folks into Notion and it becomes more of a team dynamic, that's when we want to generate revenue. So the pricing structure has been largely based on that over the years. Where the changes have come in has really been with AI. So we launched our first AI product back in February 23, which was pretty early. In fact, we went into alpha in November of 22, just like a couple weeks before ChatGPT launched. So it's pretty crazy how early Notion was to AI. And so as we thought about that back then, back in February 23, this was a really new market. We didn't know how AI would be adopted. We really didn't know what the cost would look like. And so at the time we said, let's think about this as an add-on product. So it was our first add-on SKU outside of the traditional per seat pricing plans. And we did that really to understand, like, how are people going to use AI What will this adoption look like? What will the margins look like on this? And that was like the first kind of really significant evolution in pricing in my time here. From there, what's been interesting is that the AI product has driven, a meaningful amount of growth for us. It's actually been a very high margin product because, as you know, and folks in the industry know, the model costs went way down. So costs started to really go down on AI. And we were in a fortunate situation where we could offer a lot of AI for free up until a point, and then pay gate it where you had to start to pay if you started to use it as more of a power user. And then since then, we've launched just quite a few products in AI over the last 2 years. That first product in 23 was fast followed by a series of products over the last 2 years. And more recently, in May, we made the decision to bundle AI back into the core product. And so this decision really came out of now AI is infused across the Notion experience. You mentioned Calendar and the mail product that we launched. There's a lot of AI functionality and features in there. And we didn't necessarily want that to be a separate SKU anymore, because a lot of what's happening in Notion, in core project management, in core docs and knowledge management is enabled by AI. So we've now bundled AI back, and that change went into effect in May for new users and is actually going to impacting existing users in a couple months here. And that's going to be that's the next evolution. So it's been a pretty fun journey from a pricing standpoint. And that last one was more of a packaging change than a pricing change, but it really, I think, helps land, the best experience for the customer with Notion.
There is so much to dig into here. When I think about product-led growth, Notion is they're on the Mount Rushmore, right, of PLG, at least in my mind. And you've actually told me that PLG is a product business that is driven by hits. And I've just been thinking about that over and over again. Does that mean you see upticks when marketing stunts go viral?
Yeah, I think that it's both, right? So we have the hits driven side of the business, and then we're constantly iterating on the funnel. So there are two kind of separate areas where we spend time. So the hits driven part of this is usually their product hits. So for example, and marketing as well. So one recent marketing example is earlier this year. So we had this demand for Notion faces. The Notion avatar is very popular. People want that.
I saw yours on your email.
Yeah. All the employees of Notion have it. And then it's our Slack profiles, which actually at 1,000 people is making it kind of hard to tell who's who. But I think what's great about that is we have this demand for that Notion avatar, and those avatars are created by designers within Notion. It's crazy, the backlog that they have, even just for the new employees. So the team put together an online Notion Faces builder, which enabled anyone to create a Notion face or Notion avatar. And it wasn't done as a, to create, it wasn't a marketing stunt. It was more about, hey, we have this demand from our community. Notion is a very community-led top-of-funnel growth engine. The vast majority of our acquisition is coming from viral community-led growth across the world. And our community wanted this. And we said, hey, let's build it for you. And you too can build your own Notion avatar. And it was just such a fun little bump to see the traffic and the excitement that generated. But of course, that wasn't in my model. You can't anticipate that that's going to necessarily drive traffic. Similarly, the AI launches that we've had recently, it's very hard to know. We did this May AI launch where we launched meeting notes, we launched deep research, we launched enterprise search, and hard to know what that's going to do in terms of new users signing up and monetizing. So you kind of have to take your best guesses at that. So those kind of create these spikes in that top of funnel, in those kind of growth metrics that lead to revenue. And then what's more predictable is just really optimizing the funnel. So when you think about that typical full funnel model, who's visiting Notion, who's actually clicking, who's converting into free and then converting into paid. We have an entire growth product and marketing team who focuses on continuously optimizing each stage of that funnel. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. So we've been able to, over the last couple of years, just make iterative improvements, and a small improvement in one part of the funnel can really drive a lot of growth. So we do both, but one is much easier to model than the other.
It's like you have this steady engine that's always pumping out new users, and you can toggle some of the switches or calibrate them a bit to optimize the performance. And so that's like the steady eddy. You can predict that. But then you get the icing on top because you have this product-led growth motion, which is driven by people sharing because it's community driven, that can help raise the ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's fun. It's fun to be able to invest in both. And you take shots on the product-led growth, and sometimes they hit and sometimes they don't. But we have this product market fit across such a large TAM of knowledge workers that just optimizing the funnel is a driver of really meaningful growth for us.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Did you know that around 40% of manually processed invoices contain errors, missing data, bad codes, duplicates. And those mistakes don't just slow your finance team down, they cost you money. That's why global finance automation matters. It's not just about saving time, it's about keeping your business safe from costly errors. And that's exactly what Tipalti does. Tipalti is the serious AP solution for serious business. Tipalti automates the end-to-end payables process, handling everything from onboarding suppliers to global payouts, all so your finance team can breathe again. More than 5,000, of the world's most ambitious businesses already rely on Tipalti to make payments in over 200 countries and 120 currencies. With baked-in security and tax compliance, Tipalti gives you the confidence to scale globally without adding extra finance headcount. Give your finance team their time back. Don't let bad invoices drain good money. Visit Tipalti.com/run-the-numbers. Tipalti.com/run-the-numbers. Tipalti, serious AP for serious business. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. And so I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI-powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. So I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com, aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you. Morgan Stanley recently said NetSuite is under the threat of disruption. That's right, NetSuite, the you never get fired for buying it software. So what's the threat? The answer, Rillet. Rillet is the AI native ERP modern finance teams are switching to because it's faster, simpler, and 100% built for how teams operate today. It doesn't take 12 months to implement, it doesn't feel like filing taxes to use, and your accounting team will actually love it. PostScript closes the books in only 3 days. Windsurf, bet you heard of them. They run finance with just 2 people. And Rillet is backed by Sequoia Capital. Yes, that's Sequoia. Unicorns like PostScript and Windsurf and hundreds of other companies have made the switch, and they're closing books in record time. If I were running a finance team today, I wouldn't default to legacy. I'd look at what's coming next, and Rillet is here. You don't want to be that guy at cocktail parties complaining about how bad his ERP is. Wait, am I the only guy who talks about ERPs around a keg? See how fast your team can move. Book a demo at rillet.com/metrics. That's RILLET.com/metrics. RILLET.com/metrics. I want to drill into that term knowledge workers because if I link back, I think, to where we started the combo, did you say that there's a particular team or department that's more likely than others to adopt you at first?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when we look at the data, Notion is widely adopted basically across all teams within companies. So it's hard to predict from the historical data, but when I look at our go-to-market motion, our sales motion, that is more oriented towards engineering, product, and design. So we target our marketing and we target our sales team to go after engineering, product, and design because that's where we think we have the best product market fit. And then it expands from there typically into operations, into marketing. So that's on the sales side and the way we kind of go to market. But if you actually look at the folks, the customers that are signing up in the product-led growth side, it's kind of all over the map.
Yeah, because I'm a CFO. I'm probably not in that initial ICP, but like the market is so large and I mean, the features work upgrade for me as well. It kind of reminds me of like a product like Miro, like kind of a tangential market, but they're PLG as well. And like my CPO, I remember, shared a link to a Miro board that he had built. And then suddenly I end up with the Miro license as well. And like something like that with Notion, it's inherently shareable with whatever. It's much better on multiplayer mode, I will say.
Yeah, collaboration is at the core of Notion. So yes, we have a lot of folks who use it as individuals and a lot of students who use it as individuals, but the power of Notion is really behind the collaborative tools.
Oh, students. Wow, you really are playing the long game. That's smart because then they show up to their job and goes from there.
Yeah, it's been pretty incredible to see. There's areas where we have really high student usage and penetration. South Korea is one of them, for example, and that's grown into one of our larger international markets on the revenue side.
Yeah, you take a lot of notes in class. If we take a step back, what do you think is the most powerful part of Notion's flywheel?
Yeah, I really think it is the way in which we drive revenue from these free users. So when I think about resource allocation and investment within Notion, it's really important to me that we continue to invest in the features and the functionality and the needs of those individual single player free users, because as we've seen in our data, they convert very predictably and very regularly into paid teams. And we see that month over month in the data. And so that's pretty special. And I think, we're in a fortunate position that we have this really viral top of funnel that's consistently converting into paid. Now, we've added on to that by saying, let's also build a sales team on top of that and have that team go and call on those accounts, those teams that are sitting in larger organizations, and upgrade them to the enterprise SKU, which is a SKU that has more features that are appropriate for a larger enterprise around security and some other features, and also expand them wall to wall. So it might be a part of a product team that's using Notion or a product team that's using Notion who purchased it on self-serve, and then the sales team comes in and helps drive the understanding of like, how could this actually work across the organization? Why does your CFO organization need this too? That's a really successful motion for us. And so it's those two components. It's the really viral, free top of funnel customer acquisition engine that Notion has globally that then converts into this self-serve paid. And then we have sales coming in on top and really making sure that those accounts are really successful and healthy.
I don't know if this is a controversial take, but I do think that like just core PLG can be overly romanticized if people think that like you can just scale it to a point where we'll never need a field sales motion. Like, I don't know if like this CFO at JP Morgan is going to allow like just people to keep putting it on a credit card or something. So it sounds like there was a point in that journey where you said like, it's time to have like a complementary, I guess, tops down motion with an enterprise sales team to close these bigger accounts.
Yeah, absolutely. Just over 2 years ago, we hired our CRO and she came in and has started to really build that engine. And it's been terrific because I think that, to your point, you get to a point with certain size organizations or certain kinds of organizations where that distributed credit card buying is not the way the organization functions. And so to really get to scale within those organizations and to drive real value for the customer, it does need to be a sales motion. And so I think our founding team recognized that early and put that in place. Now, we've tremendous tailwinds against our self-serve business, and that's going to continue to grow. And I love that because it's feeding into the future sales business, but we're investing heavily in sales as well, and sales is growing rapidly. So it's fun to have both, but it's also a lot to manage.
Well, speaking of trying to manage that, like what's more challenging or nuanced to model, the PLG motion or the sales motion? Or maybe I need to look at it as one, like one supports the other. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, the top line metrics leading into revenue are quite different between the businesses, as you can imagine, because
same one.
The PLG motion is really working really closely with the product teams, with the marketing teams to understand what does the roadmap look like? How do we think those activities are going to impact impressions, impact conversions, impact free to paid conversion, expansion, et cetera. And so that's a whole body of work that we got part of our strategic finance team dedicated to. And then on the sales side, those input metrics into top line have a lot more to do with, let's look at that pool that's sitting in self-serve of customers. How many of them how many of them are of a scale where we want to put a sales team on it, a salesperson on it, and actually expand and upgrade them? So that pool is really important in sizing that and making sure that that's healthy and that you have those accounts. And then what does the greenfield opportunity look like for the sales team, which for us is still really massive because we're very new at that. That's a new opportunity. And then of course your more traditional kind of capacity modeling where it's who do you have in place? How ramped are they? In what region are they? What segment are they capturing? And how do you run that down into how you're going to generate, quota and revenue? And so I think those are very different modeling processes. Where they connect is the point at which you say, hey, I have this installed book of people who pay us on self-serve. They look like this. This is how it's changing over time by region, by segment. And here's what the sales team can call on. And it's really helping understand, like, what does their pipeline look like for this quarter, for next quarter, for the coming year, and making sure that pipeline is healthy.
And it's kind of like the PLG motion is greasing the skids for the sales motion to be able to come into these accounts with a warm handoff. And what's nice about it is if they're using a work email, you can be like, oh, well, like, I'm just making it up. It's Citibank, like that. We got a lot of room to run here. I worked at a cybersecurity company that had a PLG motion. And I remember when we would see signups from someone like from Johnson & Johnson, we would be pumped like, oh, and then 10 more people joined. It's like, okay, I think we got something here.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, we're looking at those product qualified leads and saying those are right for sales engagement. And we want to put somebody on that. And then, I mean, we're, the really interesting thing about our business is we also have all these free users who are at companies, but using Notion individually. So you have an advocate at that company, and maybe that company's not paying for Notion. They're many of them are free. They're individuals who are using it, but that you can start that tops down sale with some understanding of how some folks in the organization are using Notion.
So you had said earlier that Notion made a choice to not monetize the individual. And I think that's a really big thing to unpack as a CFO because there's costs associated with it. And so I'm coming to you with a confession, Rama, and that is I used Notion for over 2.5 years without paying you a cent. You eventually got me. I'm paying now for multiple teammates. But like, can you walk me through what your mind goes to when you're thinking about cost and like just playing the long game?
Yeah, I mean, you are the perfect example. Like, I love that you converted to paid, right? So you discovered the value over time as an individual. You got a lot of conviction around the product, and then you converted to paid when you brought it to your team. Now, I think we have to think about what are the features that are in free versus paid. So, for example, there's AI. We give a lot of opportunities to try AI in free, but you can't use unlimited AI for free because there's a significant cost associated with serving AI for us.
Yeah.
And so as we think about that, we want to match the value that we're bringing to the customer with what we're charging, right? So the price needs to be commensurate with the value that we're bringing. And we believe that the AI features that we've launched are incredibly valuable and they're priced elsewhere in the market. And so we want to make sure that, we have that fiduciary view of let's also price those. And so you'll see that for unlimited usage of AI, it's gated behind our business or our enterprise plan. Previously was the add-on, but we made that change in May. And that's because, we're providing that value it's really like a cross-sell opportunity for what is like additional product. So I think that I sort of look at it as we really are very careful about monitoring what do those cohorts look like, those free cohorts when they're coming in. How does that free to paid conversion, how is that changing over time? Part of that growth team that I mentioned, that growth product and marketing team is really focused on improving free to paid conversion. So what are the in-product steps that drive a free user to add additional team members and convert to paid? And how do we make that better? But because we have really good time series data, they're proving to me that this is working and that it's working at scale, I feel really good about it. So I think it's really important that we if we want Notion to have durable growth over the next 5 to 10 years globally, I think continuing to nurture that free individual base is really important.
Well, also, it took me 2.5 years to get there, but I also have 2.5 years of my business and personal life in there. I hope someone doesn't hack me now. But it's I'm not going anywhere. That's very sticky. I need that information.
The data's there, the value is there. People love the product.
I think the term is it has data gravity to it. I'm attached to it. You said that the paid plan for AI, it's unlimited?
So the paid plan, it was originally an add-on. So the add-on was the prior iteration of it. With the May launch, if under the business plan and enterprise plan, which we've bundled in, you get unlimited features. Yeah.
And that's for a fixed per seat price, right?
It's a fixed per seat price currently. Yeah.
Does that ever worry you at all that somebody is running their whole physics laboratory on there or something and gonna, leave the water running overnight?
I mean, the way we think about it is we're still on a per seat basis. So you're still paying for AI in every seat, and not every seat is going to utilize it that way. We have some abuse limits, of course, in place. So folks aren't really abusing the system in some way. But generally speaking, the way we've done a lot of modeling on it, a lot of back testing on it, and we feel good about it. Now, there are new features coming in the market that may have us start to look more closely at usage-based pricing. So not
Mm-hmm.
everything is going to be able to be flat seat-based pricing under AI. The products in market today, we've gotten pretty comfortable with. We have a lot of product development, and we'll have some launches coming up in the next few months that we might look at a little bit differently. And that might look a little bit more usage-based, which I know is, is a big theme in the market right now. A lot of folks are talking about. So
It's very in vogue.
we've thought about that previously. It's something that we look at really closely. And I think if that matches, like I said, we just want to match the value that we're giving to the customer with how we think about the pricing. And so if we're in that position and we're driving product that's having that kind of usage and driving that kind of value, then we'll certainly think about pricing differently.
Like me as a user, I prefer it to be per seat. Like I just want to know how much I'm going to pay. And like, I'm also not using it maliciously. Like I don't have that much stuff to run in there, but I do think like the pendulum has swung both ways where sometimes like, just like keep it simple.
I think it just depends on the use cases of what we build and the cost to serve that and the value that we're providing for the customers. So we'll see. Pricing in the AI world is a pretty fun project.
I love how you started with one hypothesis, you tried it, worked for the business, but then you optimized it and moved to another. Do you have any advice for anybody else out there or CFO listening who's like, we're going to add AI to the product? How do we figure out how to sell this off the back of the truck, at least to start?
I would say what worked for us is like really understanding the usage before we got really firm on pricing. So we had the benefit of being able to offer AI for free for a period of time or up to a certain amount. So once you kind of understand how customers, and I think this goes for all new features, honestly, any kind of product development that you're doing, like you have to really understand what is the adoption going to look like? What is the usage going to look like? With AI, it's specific because there's a cost of revenue associated with it. That's different than the cost of revenue of the rest of your business. But being able to understand those usage patterns before you finalize pricing, whether you put it out in alpha or beta or however you do it, I think really accrues to the benefit of the business because it helps you make a much more informed decision when you do finalize pricing.
And you mentioned that you did have this tailwind at the same time where I don't want to like be apocryphal or make up numbers here, but let's just say like the cost may have dropped 4x from where it was on certain models, depending on what you're piping in. So, that also helps the calculus.
Yeah. The model back in early 23, it was very unclear how this was all going to play out. Yeah. The model cost drops, new models come out with better functionality and better features. And what we try to do here is we really want to match the model that we're using with the customer experience. So different features within Notion might be using different models. So we're doing a matching where we're saying, hey, for this use case, it makes sense to use this model because this model is cost effective, but it also delivers a really, really strong customer value. And for this use case, we might use a different model. So we actually have a model switcher in the background.
That's pretty neat. Wow. Okay. So another thing for you to have to model out. And Rama, you'd mentioned that you have this 3-part framework for helping people understand forecasting. I was hoping you could take us through that.
So this is my third kind of high growth tech company that I've worked at. And I think that process of helping people understand the forecasting process and the modeling can always be a journey. And I think it takes some time. The framework that I talk to my team a lot about, and I want them to talk to all their cross-functional partners about, is when you first start forecasting a new part of the business or start budgeting for the first time in a really serious way, then you start doing your budget versus actuals each month, and you're kind of creating that transparency. You're showing back to the business, we thought it was going to be this, but instead it's this. Because one thing is for sure, it's not going to be exactly what you thought it was going to be.
It's just how wrong are you?
It's going to be some deviation one way or the other. The way that I think about that is there's usually 3 reasons that the actuals differ from the forecast or the budget. They're not always mutually exclusive, but they mostly are. And that's generally, okay, it was a fat finger error. There was an error in the model. And if there's an error in the model, like that's okay, fix it. Mistakes happen. I really want my team to always just be transparent and say like, this is something that went wrong. And so we're going to fix that for the next one. So that's one thing. The second reason that I think, we often see is because you had an assumption that was incorrect. So where this comes up a lot in these early stages of building this intuition around forecasting is when you think about, I as a product leader, I as a marketing leader thought that when I do X, Y will happen. And you work with data science and you try to build that connectivity. But oftentimes in the early days, you don't have the time series data. You're still learning and building that intuition collectively. And your assumption was a little bit off. So that's fine because that being incorrect just means like the next quarter, you're just going to do that a little bit better. Or the next month, you're going to refine that model and do it a little bit better. But I think acknowledging that is helpful because then people know where to focus on where to build that better intuition and data connectivity. And then the last one is an operational decision. So oftentimes, you set this plan, we set our plan on the half. So we do a full year model at the beginning of the year, but we're really setting most of the operating plans at least in engineering product design for the half. And so that may be a decision like we thought that we were going to launch XYZ feature on this date. We didn't feel comfortable with the product quality. We pulled back and pushed it out a date. And that's obviously going to impact, the revenue in your model because you push it out. But that's just an operational decision, and it's the right decision for the business. But it, of course, has an impact of business to business performance. And so I also think that can take a little bit of the sting out of things looking different. It's sort of like there's a reason for it. And in all three of those cases, you can learn from that, and you can reflect on it and say, in the operational case, like, this was the impact of that decision. Does it make sense or not? Would I make a different decision next time? So I think that it's been a framework that's worked for me. And so it's one that I try to get people to listen to.
I really like it too, because it takes not only the sting out of it, but like the personal element, because a lot of times when something goes wrong, it's like the forecast is wrong. So then people just jump to like, it must be somebody's fault.
Yeah.
But this breaks it down into like things that you can put your arms around that don't really have like a person attached to
Exactly. Yeah. And I also think there's something valuable about just acknowledging that everything isn't perfect the first time you do these things, and it takes time. It takes time to get good at forecasting. It doesn't happen overnight.
I also really appreciate what you said about being at a hypergrowth company and just not having the data to build off of. Like, we made an assumption, but like we were doing that off of like 1 quarter worth of data of this new product. Like we're moving into APJ, and I was completely making up like what we thought Japan was going to be. Someone said to me recently that like when you're modeling something, you're like just trying to set a hypothesis of what the goal is going to be in the early days. It's less so like this is set in stone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the financial model is just a reflection of the business, right? So all it is it's showing you what are all the activities happening around the business. And that's the historicals. And the forecast is, here's everything we think we're doing, and here's what we think it's going to result in. But I agree, it's a hypothesis. And over time, you get much better at that. You develop the intuition, but it takes time.
Can you speak more to using like a 6-month like halftime in there? Is that what you run sales comp plans off of too?
So we currently do set the fin plan for sales for the half, and we have quarterly payouts. So they have quarterly targets, but we're setting the sales plan for the half. We actually had quite a few discussions around this with investors and with our board. And I think that given where we are today in our sales journey, which is still very early, it's still a smaller part of our business, it makes a lot of sense. We're also primarily serving like the commercial and mid-market and lower end of enterprise. So the cycles on these deals today is not necessarily that long. So for us, that does make sense. I think that as we think about building out more of an enterprise team and moving up market, we may think about that timeline differently for that set sellers. But right now, that's what we're running.
I really commend you for that, because I think everybody like to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Everyone's like, oh, you set an annual plan and you just stick to that. It's like, well, are you serving, I don't know, sales cycles for customers that are like 30 days long? Like, you should really think about what's best for like your business motion, but also to make sure that like you're making the people whole that are working on it, because it protects the business, but it also protects, I think, like the sales reps and the leaders in case like you do make one of those model mistakes.
Agreed. I think we're in a development position, and the segments that we're selling into, given the time for the deal cycles, where this makes sense. Not saying it's going to make sense forever, but it certainly feels like the right cadence for us today.
And like with the product development life cycle, do you also run off of like releases that are quarterly or every 6 months or anything like that? Or is it just continuous?
It's pretty continuous, but we set a plan on the half. There is movement in terms of what the expected release dates and even some of the marketing initiatives between the halves. And that's, in my prior companies, we were much more focused on keeping things within the quarter to have those quarterly results. Where we are today in Notion, that's not where we are from an operational standpoint. So we're doing it on the half, and I'm comfortable with that. I have enough visibility into kind of what's happening to understand how that might impact my quarter. That feels right for the business today. I think that's actually this is so key to where the stage of operational maturity of the operating teams is, and you have to meet them there. From a finance perspective, if you try to force it into a quarterly cadence, but that's not the way the teams are ready to operate, that's also a failure state. So from my perspective, it makes more sense to think about things on the half.
I've also been in companies where you're working with people who have literally never had a budget before.
Yes.
And you're just like explaining to them like how it works. And you can't like over club it and like try to get overly specific, because like even if you can create an 18-tab model, it does not mean that they're going to be able to run with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just really started to build out our corp fin team this year. It's a really big investment for me this year. And I think that's so important, because when you go to a leader for the first time and say, tell me everything you're going to do for the next 6 months, what is it that you're trying to do? What are you going to set out? And they've never thought that way before. That's really hard. And they're almost definitely going to come back to you and be like, there was this thing that I didn't think of because it's a blank sheet of paper. They're not looking at it from like a playbook where everybody on their team has thought this way. So I think you have to give people some grace on that.
I remember with one leader, I showed up to the meeting and like we were supposed to talk about like cloud costs because they were like going off the rails. And I was like, hey, listen, this is what we budgeted at the beginning of the year. We're like 4 months in here and we were like way off. And he's like, well, I've never had to give a number before.
Yep.
Like I would just, if I wanted to be like more mature about this, so I kind of made it up. And I was like, this is my fault that I forced him to do this without like actually knowing where we were, like maturity wise.
Yeah, I did. Well, I also think there is something helpful about showing people like, here's what we thought, here's where it is, how do we get better at this? I actually think that healthy exchange is the way that everyone gets better at this. You just sort of say, hey, like, this is what I thought. And then I think you can go back to my model framework. It's like, here's why it was different.
Yes.
Yeah.
There we go. We used it in real time.
Yeah, there you go.
That was, well, we chalked it up to an assumption error.
That was an assumption error. Yeah. Whose assumption it was that we won't have to talk about that, but it's an assumption.
Yeah, we won't put a name on that one. I just don't put my name though. We're going to transition to talk about M&A a bit. And before your time at Notion, you had a huge hand in the sale of Credit Karma to Intuit. We actually just had Intuit CFO on 2 episodes ago.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I can't believe all these people like you were coming on my podcast. I'm shocked. Can you tell us the story of that acquisition?
That was a really wild ride. So we signed that deal right before the holidays, or right after the holidays, I should say, before COVID. And so it was a long time in the making. There were conversations between the companies for some time. Then we're coming into that spring and the deal is signed and COVID hits. And the deal was a complicated one because Credit Karma, we had purchased a tax business a few years prior. And that tax business was Credit Karma is a financial services platform. It's a marketplace. It's always free to consumers. And one of the pillars of that was like, how do we create more value for consumers around these financial products that cost a lot of money, and tax is one of them, tax filing specifically. And so we purchased that tax filing business. And as part of the sale to Intuit, we went through a DOJ review. And as part of that review, of course, they, one of the areas they wanted us to remediate in order to close the sale was the sale of the tax business. So it's COVID. And the beginning of COVID, when it started, was a really tricky time in the market. I think there was the uncertainty in the market was so high. And for a business like Credit Karma, we sold financial products. So our marketplace had credit cards, it had loans. And underwriters really tightened up at the start of COVID. And basically access to consumer funding was really cut low. And so that has a meaningful impact on Credit Karma's revenue because we generate revenue when people take out credit cards. That was a really tricky time. We're under this merger agreement with Intuit. Pretty meaningful changes to our revenue. We had an absolutely terrific management team and founder there who really didn't want to lay anybody off going into the pandemic, all this uncertainty. So we took some really significant steps. We really cut down on marketing. We moved a lot of those people into different roles. We stopped a lot of hiring, but we found roles for everybody. So people wanted to stay, they could stay just in a different place in the company, which is pretty wild. And at the same time, everyone's kind of learning to use Zoom for the first time and starting to be remote. And we're in this process to sell the tax business. And of course, it had to be a buyer with the wherewithal that, that would be appropriate for the DOJ. They wanted it to be, a credible buyer who was really going to invest in the business. And so it was a really wild year, I would say. What was interesting is that if you remember, what happened in COVID was a total 180 from that. What ended up happening was that consumers ended up becoming they had a lot of savings in COVID because a lot of what they were spending on, they were no longer spending on. So underwriting loosened up significantly. Credit Karma started to do incredibly well. As COVID progressed and the profile of the consumer became clear to lenders, that consumers were actually incredibly healthy during COVID because they weren't spending on trips and they weren't spending on Ubers and they weren't spending on restaurants. So they had a lot more discretionary income and it was a really healthy consumer base. And so we did this 180 through the process of the deal in terms of the Credit Karma business. And then we're doing the sale in the background. So it was absolutely wild, but we were successful in selling our tax business to Block and they've done a great job with that product. It's been really fun to see from afar. The purchase of that company originally was also my deal, that tax business. So I was very happy to see it land in a great home and continue to do well. And then we closed the sale to Intuit. So it was a really wild year, but learned a ton. And it was just fun to be a part of.
My goodness. All right. So quick pulse check there. In order to sell your company, you had to spin off another portion of it. You had to work with the DOJ. You had to put up with a global pandemic and you had to find a way to keep everybody employed while also keeping costs somewhat in check.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it was tricky. I mean,
that's an easy Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely tricky, but I got to say, it was an incredible team and everyone just kind of rallied together and got it done. So yeah, I mean, it was a fun one. I wouldn't recommend that again, but it was a fun one.
And you were running corp dev at the time, right?
Yeah, corp dev and strategic finance. I had biz ops, so a couple different teams. Yeah.
And so you go to the negotiating table with a juggernaut like Intuit. How many people were there from your side and how many people were there from their side?
Oh, wow. They had a huge team. I mean, we did not. So my corp dev team was maybe like 4 people, and they had an absolutely massive team. They are such a well-run, terrific company. They have their process and they run their process, and it is very efficient, but it was 20 times the scale, if not bigger than ours.
I'm picturing like 4 people on one side of the table and
It
like
was-
30 on the
Yeah,
other.
yes. I do remember our diligence meetings. It was like 3 of us and so many of them. It was quite
Actually, Zoom would make that a lot less daunting, actually.
fair. Yeah, fair. The diligence with them was mostly in person because it was before COVID, and then it was eye-opening. It was a different scale.
What was the like number of days or months from the time that like this looked like it was going to go till like it finally got done? Like from sign to close, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, from sign to close was just under a year to sell the tax business. From the start of negotiations to close was probably a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
My goodness. Well, what was that like the day it was over? Was it a relief?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I would say that it's too bad because we weren't all in person. We were all remote at that time because it was like the middle of COVID. But I think that kind of process creates so much uncertainty for an organization because that honestly is like one of the hardest parts, I think, of a transaction like that is you are in this position where you have announced a deal. So employees know that you've announced this sale and you have to explain to employees, why are we doing this? Why is this good for your career? Why does this make strategic sense? What does this combination look like together that makes us better together than separate? So you're doing all of that. And then there's this overhang of, are we going to get through this regulatory process? And if so, how? And it's hinging on being able to sell a part of the business to a buyer that's acceptable to the DOJ. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. And that's like a very small group of people who's involved in that. But you somehow have to keep the communications with the broader company where everyone's still moving ahead and saying like, this is where we're going and we're so really excited about this. But you as a leadership team and the folks who are closest to it know that there's still some uncertainty because you have to get through a regulatory process that you don't fully control. So that I think is really challenging. And then it was the pandemic, which like was really challenging for everybody, especially in those first 6 months when people just didn't know what was happening or, we didn't have a lot of by the end of the pandemic, I think people had their processes and they figured it out. But at the beginning, you're sort of like, and now I've got my kids here and I'm doing this thing and that's life, It was really stressful. But I think that it's just honestly a testament to the culture of that company and our founder, Ken, that people just rallied. They got behind it. They understood. They said, this is why this is great for us. And we're just going to like get through this and make it happen. And I really think that's like the culture of the company.
What people don't realize from the outside looking in is when you're under agreement to be acquired, you like can't change many things within your company. Like you can't go and change your capital structure. You can't go and start just like ripping departments out or like switching all your leaders around because there's like a going concern. Like they want to be buying what they're supposed to be buying. So like I can imagine that was extremely challenging.
It was a lot of communication back and forth. So yes, any big changes that we were making, we were talking to the Intuit team about before we were making them. But we had to make some changes because of the pandemic. I mean, things were...
Yeah, you got to get sign off from them. They're probably like, we want you to be okay.
So again, like I think that's just... It was a lot of communication. It was a lot of making sure everyone was on the same page before you made big decisions. And then I think it was just like a little bit of optimism.
Yeah. And when I was selling the company I was last CFO at, I was stressed like we got to hit our revenue targets while we're under agreement. Like it's interesting when you're fundraising, you give like really lofty revenue targets, but like if you're selling the company or if you're trying to get like debt and you don't want bad covenants on it, like you give like somewhat conservative. But you had like both swings. You had like, oh my goodness, this is plummeting. But then we were absolutely ripping right now because of like the macro conditions. You had it both ways.
Yeah, I do think that because the pandemic impacted industries like across the board and in different ways, you do get a little grace because of that. Like that was a macro event that was incredibly challenging or an opportunity depending on which sector you're in for so many companies. And so, but it's a really hard time to manage. I mean, from there I went to Instacart, which had 4x'd in the pandemic, and I joined and that was a crazy situation in the other way, where it's like that's a business that had just 4x'd, had built really good infrastructure, but not the infrastructure for a company of that size, and was looking to imminently go public. And so that's a different challenge. And okay, so how do you start to model a business that was just growing like crazy because of an externality, and it's such a strong fundamental business, really strong unit economics, terrific market, terrific product, but not going to grow 4x every year. How do
Yeah,
you start to model?
some people are going to go to grocery stores. We got Instacart actually last night. We're on vacation
Yeah,
because we didn't know what the store was. But like, if we're at home, we're still going to the grocery store. So how do you model that?
So how do you model that? And how do you build that intuition, which I think goes back to what we were talking about before, which is like, how do you build that intuition amongst the teams of like, when I do this, this happens. And everyone has to kind of like start to understand that.
Rama, you gave me some excellent advice when it comes to M&A. You said that the org chart is the most important part of the process, but it's often left to last for some reason. Can you explain that?
Yeah, and that's not advice from me. That was one of our board members at Credit Karma, who is absolutely awesome. So I think in the first deal I did there was like, yeah, the org chart has to be in this initial deck and it needs to be, up front. And I have to say that's been some of the best advice I've ever gotten. I think that oftentimes when you're looking at deals, you're looking at the product, you're looking at the business fundamentals, you're thinking, here's why this is going to be accretive, or here's why this is going to accelerate my product roadmap. And what often gets overlooked is, well, what's the pro forma reporting structure? How is this really going to work? Will these people be happy in this structure? Where is the line of their decision-making versus decision-making above them and decision-making at the executive team? And all of that, those discussions come out when you actually show the org chart and talk about how is this reporting structure really going to work. Otherwise, those discussions are sort of like, yeah, we're going to figure that out. We're going to figure that out. Like, it'll be fine, because this is such a great business or this is such a great product. And I would say for all of the M&A that I've seen, on the corporate side, I'd say that most of the deals that have failed because that org structure wasn't thought through entirely. And it wasn't, we didn't spend the time up front thinking about the pros and cons of that reporting structure or that set of roles and responsibilities and decision-making.
And especially if it's a founder-owned business or founder-led business, like who are they going to sit under? Who are they going to report to? Are they going to be used to having to actually like get like the green light on some stuff? Like if you don't talk about that at the beginning, like it can tank a deal.
Yeah, I think it can just, and then it's like you already made the investment, right? Like you bought the company, you spent the money, you have a bunch of people there now. You've probably talked about it a bunch internally. There's all these expectations around what's going to happen, but you haven't talked about the most fundamental thing, which is like, how are these people really going to work together with your organization and how do they fit in your organization? And I just think that is the most important thing in any deal. So I think that was great advice I got, and I'm holding on to it.
Well, thanks for sharing it here. Thanks for sharing it. So check the org chart, everybody. Put it in that
front and center and talk about it.
Yeah, and talk about it. All right. I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So you have one of the most impressive resumes of any of the guests I've had on the show, but I have to ask, what's one mistake you've made on the job before?
Yeah. Oh, it's a good question. I actually think a lot of what we've just been talking about, so tying product and usage metrics to financial outcomes. So I found that like getting that alignment between cross-functional leaders and the data team and finance early is so critical to rally the team around metrics that actually move the business. And I'd say that's one thing, like even if I think about my Notion experience, I really wish that I had done that earlier, because the earlier you do that in a company's journey, the more you can get people focused on kind of like, okay, here's how my business decisions are impacting business performance. And one of the things that I think, if I could do this, go back to myself 3 years ago and do this differently, I would have started with the financial model and said like, okay, this is the model. We don't know if it's right or wrong, but what are the upstream inputs to that above revenue? And how do we all work together to tie those to the product and usage metrics that you all are used to looking at? And I took the approach of, you all are looking at these product and usage metrics. Let me try to tie them to my financial model. And most
you did it the reverse.
Don't.
Yeah.
So I think that was just like a really good learning for you, where I feel like I could have saved us so much time if I had just been a little more firm and like, let's work backwards. Like, what is the business outcome we're trying to drive? And then sure, we don't have to focus on that with all the teams, but we need to focus on the drivers, the input metrics that actually drive that versus input metrics that are very adjacent or that will never correlate or that we can't build that connectivity to. So good learning for me. And luckily we have this like incredible data leader here. He's been here for about a year, who sees this and gets this and has just spent like a ton of time with me rebuilding a lot of that infrastructure.
There's an art and a science to marrying the product and user metrics to the financial metrics.
Yes.
And like you can get it extremely wrong and like just try to link them up because it looks good on paper, but it can break. But if you get it right, it's a beautiful thing because you can totally see where the car is driving.
Exactly. And you can drive it. You can actually create outcomes. Look, not everybody has to be tied to financial outcomes. I don't believe that. I think that there's teams in the organization that should not be, especially an organization like Notion. We're very design focused, creative focused. There's a lot of intuition in the product development that is so important to where Notion has gotten to today, and I think is going to be critical to our future, that I in no way want to step on that. but there's parts of the business that should be tied more closely to business outcomes. And I think it is the job of finance, I really do, to help people understand that.
And I've made the mistake before, like trying to trickle down OKRs that are financially based to like the product designers. And it's like, I'm forcing it right now.
That doesn't, So this is, I mean, I don't know if I'll get this right, but that's one that I just, wish I'd done differently.
No, I think that's so cool. That's so cool. Next one for you. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools does your team use to get the job done?
Yeah, of course. So on the finance side, our core stack is NetSuite, Stripe, and Rock and Zip. Our central product data is in Snowflake. And so we're utilizing Snowflake for a lot of that product usage data and also some of the allocations as we're thinking about allocations on the P&L. We just moved to Ramp for credit cards and expenses. That's been an awesome move for us. And we're in the process of implementing Pigment for P&A. We've been running on Sheets and Excel. And so we're implementing Pigment. And then we're making the move to Workday and ADP for payroll. So that's happening this year as well. But of course, like our forecasting and our billing is really reliant on a bunch of cross-functional systems. So we've got Salesforce is the primary system that we're using on the sales side, and our CX team runs Zendesk. But we implemented Decagon last year, and Decagon has been just a terrific solution for us to reduce costs and manual ticket volume. I think we have like 48% ticket deflection. Using Decagon, it's been pretty impressive. So that's kind of a holistic view of the stack. But we have a lot of initiatives here to start to really think about how do we think about automation and AI to create systems improvements? And that's been a big topic of discussion for our executive team and for our business technology team, which actually lives with me. I think it'll be really interesting to see like how we evolve using Notion for certain things, thinking about automations and AI for certain things. I'm not suggesting that there's an opportunity for like a rip and replace against any of these things with AI. That's just actually not the case today, I think. But there is room for incremental improvement and process improvement and to shave some time off and shave some manual processes off. And so that's what we're focused on.
Nice. Wow, you get the business and tech team under you. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, I think we're getting to a scale where it's going to start to make sense for us to think about it being centralized within engineering, product design, and time. But yeah, I built it. So
love it. Wow. Okay. All right. Last one I got for you. If you could tell your younger self something, knowing what you know today, what would you tell her?
Oh gosh, probably that context and storytelling is everything, and it matters so much more than whatever the analysis is. I think that when you're a junior in your career, especially like I started out in banking and private equity, you're just in the weeds on these like very detailed financial analyses and you're spending so much time on that. And then there's this switch where it's really not even about the numbers on the page. It's about how are you just telling the story in like 3 very simple bullets that everyone can understand. And the backup all has to be there and it, hopefully is right. But all that doesn't need to be communicated. What needs to be communicated is like the TLDR that everybody in the room cross-functionally can get. And if somebody has questions about the backup, you can go into that. But so I think that 90% of it is just the context that you're setting and the way you're telling the story.
That is an amazing note to end on. Rama, I can't thank you enough for coming on. This has been a blast.
No, thanks for having me. And I have enjoy the rest of your trip to Nantucket.
Thank you. I will. Run the Numbers is a mostly media production. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by Meg D'Alessandro. Show is executive produced by Ben Hillman. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog way too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses. LOL. If you like this podcast, hit subscribe and give us 5 stars. It will take like 2 seconds and our algorithm overlords love it. Drink water, call your mom, and have a great day. Peace.